Hello. In the Crown of Aragon, 639 years ago, it was May 4th, 1387. My name is Jonathan Seyfried. I'm a PhD candidate in history at the University of New Mexico, and this is the Historian's Notebook, a podcast about how history gets made. Season 1 is titled Multcara Compagnona. We're looking at a document from each day of the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violant de Bar. Let's begin today's document. So, a few days ago, in episode 126, I was talking about how the historian from the 1950s, Rafael Tassisi Marca, made a mistake in thinking that the documents about Joan's near-death illness in April were actually, the mistake he made was thinking that those documents were about what happened in January. And I traced how Rafael Tassisi Marca almost certainly was drawing from Josep Roca's book from 1929. So on page 392 of Josep Roca's biography of Joan, we have another mention of what happened in April. And Roca cites Register 2056, Folio 98, which is today's document. And the way that he introduces it, again, on this page, Roca is talking about things from vastly different periods of time within Joan's life. It seems to me like on the paragraph right after he's discussing what happened in 1387, he then goes on to talk about a moment from when Joan was not yet king, so refers to Joan as El Primogenite. So Roca goes back and forth in these time periods, really dramatic swings, and so it would be very difficult for anybody to untangle that if they're only working from what Roca himself did. And the paragraph that discusses what happened in April, it doesn't say anything about the month of April. It introduces the historical moment of Joan's near-death illness with the sentence, Tot just pres possessori de la corona aragonesa, Johann I caigue malalt de greu malaltia ignota, la desconescenza, I messed this up in my pronunciation, hold on, la desconescenza de questa pels meches, suggerí a la reina le dia del malefici. I am so sorry for my Catalan pronunciation. I'm sure that anybody who knows Catalan really well was just cringing as I read that out. But basically what Roca says here is very soon, tout jus prest, very soon after Joan had possessed the Crown of Aragon. So he's saying this in a more poetic way, and if Roca is looking at the entire lifespan of Joan, which he does in his book, he covers from Joan's birth all the way until his death. Well, of course, if you're in that zoom out level of periodization, then it would be, relatively speaking, if we're talking about April, just after he had gotten the crown. So it's reasonable to use that phrase, but if somebody is trying to zoom in a lot further, like I am, and I'm really trying to figure out what happened in January versus what happened in April, then this is problematic, this phrasing. So what helps is that Roca had cited folio, actually on the page, it's the verso of 97 and then also the recto of folio 98 in register 2056. And the stuff that's on the verso of folio 97 is dated differently, and also it's not as specific as what we have with our document for today, dated on the 4th of May. So I went in to the archive, I mean digitally. My access to these documents is so much more easy than what Rafael Tassis y Marca would have had to do in the 1950s as he was writing his book. For me, it's just a couple clicks away to get to this page in the register. But for Rafael Tassis y Marca, he would have had to physically go to the archive of the Crown of Aragon and would have had to request this. He would have had to spend a day, to do this, to go consult the page, right? And so, I can understand his goal was different, and he wanted to do, for the first time in modern scholarship, a chronological biography of Joan. And so that's cool. That's all right. But, we can understand how he had to make trade-offs, just like any historian does, in terms of how to spend his time, and then how that created the error of thinking that the near-death experience was in January. But we are now quite certain that when we are looking at this paragraph in Roca and also the document in the register itself, that the danger that Joan faced, the most severe moment of illness thus far in his reign, and maybe even in his life, maybe he was never as close to death until this moment in late April of 1387, right? We know that it is certainly, when we're talking about that severity of his illness and that moment, it is not January, it is this late April, the evening of April 28th. All right, let's go back to the first two sentences of the paragraph from Roca that I read out. So the first sentence, translated into English, roughly means almost as soon as he possessed the crown of Aragon, Joan fell ill from an unknown disease, a grave unknown disease. That's the first sentence. Second sentence, the unknown quality of that illness, or the fact that the doctors, the médecins, the doctors, okay, so the unknowability of that illness by the doctors gave or resulted in the queen having the idea of malefici, is the word that Roca uses. And malefici would be best translated into English as evil sorcery. Let's see, is there a one-word way to do that in English? It's not coming to my mind right now. So basically, we now are getting into this stage in the story in which the spiritual, the sidereal, enters in a very large way. Until the end of April of 1387, we have not seen hardly any documents that have brought up magic or sorcery or even all that much of like divine intervention. The will of God and thanks to God for the, all these things, that's been invoked. So the providence, the happiness of God and, the divine Lord God, Signor Deu, it's been invoked, but it hasn't been invoked in a way that's as direct or as short-term as what we're about to see. So today's document is the first of several, and they're not all in a row, but basically over the next few months, especially with Violant in her letters, we see a discussion of sorcery, of spells, of malefici, and of an attempt by Violant to counter it in the battleground of the spiritual. So when Violant wrote to those monasteries, asking them all to pray for the health of Joan, that is an effort to meet the evil forces where they're attacking in the realm of the spiritual. And it's pretty certain to me that Violant was not just kind of like covering her bases or just in case there's some evil sorcery out there, I'd better do some, kind of covering or sort of like a backup plan just in case. This is like the cause that Violant, I think, settles on as the reason for why Joan almost died. Now, today's document is really situated in that context. The only word that I could find in this document that is connected to magic or evil sorcery is the same word that Roca used in that second sentence. On line 9 of the document, we see the phrase de semblant malefici. So that word could be translated as ill will or evil deeds. It doesn't necessarily have to be translated if you're just kind of pulling it out of context. It doesn't have to be translated as the sidereal sense of casting spells or evil sorcery. Roca translated it in that way, and he makes that decision because he has read a bunch of the other documents that we are going to read. So we've seen in other documents, or I should say we're about to see in other documents, the pairing of malefici with other words like sortileges and constructions. So those words, when put together with malefici, we have a set of terms like sorcery, spells. And so when we see this word here, it's very clear that what's being referred to is sidereal. What's being referred to here is magic, the use of evil magic against Joan. And I say all this with a lot of emphasis because I want to take a moment before going further with this document to say that the open claw pipeline whiffed on this document. I mean, it got some things okay, but I would say that it really just missed the major point here, which is that Violant is accusing some people of sorcery and targeting Joan and basically being the cause of his illness. That is a huge deal. And the open claw process totally missed that and mistranslated malefici for just saying crimes. Basically translated that word as crimes, which is in no way getting at the actual meaning here. And then I'll just also note that if you open up the PDF that I'm going to put onto the webpage for today's document, for the open claw, what was generated, Gemini just really had some kind of glitch and ended up repeating the word demons like many dozens of times, like taking up like a whole entire page with that word. So like it really malfunctioned for demons. But what I will say is that when we get to tomorrow's document, we're going to see how the open claw pipeline was extremely useful. So it's just that this is so sporadic. It's just not consistent. Sometimes that open claw pipeline, it did great, and then other times it did really bad. So here we have a situation where because Roca has talked about this document and because it's in Catalan, it's almost like the open claw pipeline had no use for me. But, you know, it's proven itself to be very useful in other documents on other days. So there you have it. Sporadic is what I would say about the quality of that agentic AI output. All right, that was the AI usage digression for the day. And now let's go back to the letter itself. Let's look at the sourcing here. So we have the addressee at the bottom. Violant is once again writing to the ambassadors of the Crown of Aragon in Avignon. And of course, it's referred to as the Court of Rome, but we know that that is Avignon because of the Great Schism. All right, if you're not clear about that, then definitely look at some of the past episodes about the Great Western Schism, which you can get to by browsing through the tags on the website. The probata is very typical. So, Doña Regina mandavit mihi is the first line. Second line, Bartolomeo servent. And then below that is a standard probata symbol. The letter starts out by saying, Rebuda haven vostra letra. I have received your letter. So we're having very conversational back and forth here, in which, you know, it'd be really interesting to hear what the ambassadors wrote back, having received that very dramatic play-by-play letter from Violant about how Joan almost died. And it's not the end of the information that Violant is going to be giving them about that. Tomorrow's document revisits that moment and gives some additional info. But for now, today's document is all about informing the ambassadors that 2 people have been captured and imprisoned. And we only know them by their last names. One of them has a very long last name, Saragosi de Mayorques. So someone whose name includes a place origin. So Saragosi de Mayorques. And then the other person mentioned in this letter, their last name is Pontons. Now, I know that for sure because of Roca. In that same page 392 that I was quoting from before, a little bit further down, Roca basically summarizes this document by saying that Violant had informed the ambassadors that these two individuals had been captured, and they were both advisors, maybe you could even say knights. They were knights in the service of Queen Sibilla. And so they are now imprisoned, and Violant, in a couple different ways in this letter, says that they are secure and they're not going to get away. So basically, she's just communicating it's interesting that she repeats the phrases. So in line 4, she says, per res escapar no pogues. They're not able to escape. And then in the second to the last full line, she's talking about the other person and says, escapar no pusha. Yeah. All right. So basically, she's saying these two people have been imprisoned, and it seems like the charge of malefici is only being applied to Pontons. So I'm not quite sure why Roca goes so far as to say that, oh, maybe he is actually being specific about Pontons, because he's using, I think, a singular verb in order to describe the malefici in the document. So, all right, I think it's maybe only Pontons that's being accused of the evil sorcery, and that the first person mentioned in the letter, Sibilla de Mallorques, was just helping Sibilla and therefore has been imprisoned. Okay. Now, I just want to return for a moment to the April 29th event that Hieronymo Zorita wrote about, and I still can't find any mention of this execution of some of the other advisors to Sibilla de Fortià. I can't find it mentioned in these letters. I maybe might be able to find something in one of the other archival categories like the procesos on Pares, but I have a limited amount of time to go searching for that right now. It's the end of the semester. Things are a little bit busy. But maybe later on I'll be able to search through some of the documents in the procesos and be able to find something about that April 29th execution of two of Sibilla's advisors. But what we can see here in this document is that there's others that are imprisoned, and they might be executed too. We'll see if we have any further information down the road about what happens to Sibilla de Mallorques and Pontons. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Historian's Notebook, Season 1, Molt Cara Compagnona. If you are leaving with more questions than you arrived with, I've done my job. Remember, the motto of The Historian's Notebook is dissatisfaction guaranteed. Visit the website to see an image of today's document and additional show notes, and listen again tomorrow to hear about the next day in the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violant de Bar. In the meantime, take care.